Rockin' Royal, rockin' Navy, know y'all with me, let's get it, baby, Rockin' Royal.
Welcome back to another
Navy,
edition
know you
of
with me.
Rockin'
Let's
Royal,
get it,
the
baby.
podcast for
We
those
just
who
came back
rock the
from
Y
vacation.
on the field,
We
on the
going
court,
crazy.
on the pitch, and
Kalani got no
beyond.
problems. You could
As
call me
always, I'm
Jay-Z.
Sean Walker, your
Best
BYU beat
defensive
writer at
coordination since the
KSL.com,
1980s.
here for another football edition of the podcast, which is a big week around Lavelle Edwards Stadium, in my humble opinion. It's Big 12 opener, BYU at home after 2 weeks on the road to wrap up non-conference play. And I think this might be one of the biggest games BYU will play in conference this season. Yes, I know there is that little old rivalry game, those arch rivals, the team up north, whatever you want to call them at the University of Utah. Um, but I think this game might be even better, even bigger. Number 13, Kansas State, making a trip to BYU for the first time in, I don't know, some 40 something years. It certainly feels that way. First time BYU and K State will play since that 1996 season that included the 97 Cotton Bowl. Steve Sarkisian and Omar Morgan and all of them. BYU fans have pretty fond memories of that game. K State fans, I'm learning, not so much maybe. And so because of that, I've brought in a guy who I've been following since BYU joined the conference. One of my favorite follows in the K-State realm. Derek Young, publisher of kstateonline.com. That's a direct URL. If you want to go there, visit his website. It's part of the On3 network. So if you're on On3, if you're an On3 subscriber, you get full access to all of Derek's work over there at kstateonline.com. Derek, thanks so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. I actually probably not a surprise. I'm still too young to be someone that covered the team at that time. I was still living in Ohio, I believe. Yeah, in the 90s. So I was more of an Ohio State fan at the time. But I will say I'm obviously on the Three Mall podcast as well with John Kurtz and Cole Manbeck. So I'm kind of in a lot of different angles when it comes to Kansas State mediums to where you can get your coverage there. But the gist I get from that game is it's the most painful bowl loss in Kansas State fans have, or
Like number one.
could be number one, or one of two, because
Okay.
that one especially hurts because of the lead that they had that they squandered.
Sure.
Just from what I've learned, I think they were up by 10 points at one point, and that was the first January first bowl game in Kansas State school history, I believe.
Oh,
So it was incredibly meaningful. Obviously, they were in the
yeah.
middle of the greatest turnaround in college football history, as everyone likes to say, with Bill Snyder did at K-State and what they came from. It's that one, or trying to get the year right when they played Ohio State in the Fiesta Bowl, which is their first like BCS bowl game, and were on the heels of one of their most tremendous seasons ever. And then the night before, there's a lot of Al Roberson drama, and Ohio State beats them because they obviously going up against that brand that meant a lot too.
Yep.
So it's one of those two games. But not fond memories, but that BYU Cotton Bowl in the 90s is one that is definitely squarely on the mind of Kansas State fans still to this day.
Not fond memories, but certainly memorable, along with that 2004 Fiesta Bowl against Ohio State. That was a fun game. I remember that one. Bill Snyder, Jim Tressel. That was probably not so fun for K-State fans. But yeah, something about Kansas State football and their rise over the last 20, 25 years that I think has been pretty remarkable to watch in a lot of ways. Actually, BYU coach Kalani Sitake brought this up earlier this week, and maybe I'll get some of your thoughts on it as well. These two programs, they've only played, I think, 8 previous times. I think this will be the 9th all-time meeting between BYU and Kansas State in football. Yeah, the series is tied 4-4 overall. But despite kind of the lack of depth in the series, these two programs do have a lot that, like, they are a lot alike in some ways. The line that Kalani Sitake threw out when he was talking to us in the media was BYU has Lavelle Edwards, Kansas State has Bill Snyder. And for BYU fans, that's like the highest of highest compliments. Lavelle Edwards, College Football Hall of Famer, absolute legend, a late legend, may he rest in peace, in Provo, still revered to this day in so many ways. And I have a feeling that for K-State fans, Bill Snyder kind of holds a fairly similar place in their hearts as well. So to be on that level, it does feel like maybe there is a little bit of similarity between these two programs, despite the fact that they've only played each other a handful of times in their history, right?
Yeah, I can say one thing, and maybe BYU fans will be able to relate if I say it this way. Bill Snyder was the only coach in Kansas State history to win a bowl game until 2021, when Chris Kleiman and Kansas State beat LSU in the Texas Bowl. Up until that year, the only head coach ever to win a bowl game at Kansas State was Bill Snyder.
Yeah. So it very much kind of like BYU. I mean, the little bit of a kind of an also ran before LaVelle Edwards got there in the mid 70s. And then, as they say, the rest is history. Took them to their first bowl game 2 or 3 years in, revitalized the passing game, the West Coast offense, the spread offense, all of that. And leading up to, obviously, that 1984 national championship and others, including that 1996 or 97. I guess we have to call it the 97 Cotton Bowl, even though I connected to the 96 team, which for my money, in my opinion, Derek, is at the very least the most underrated BYU football team all time. It might be the best. I think it has an argument to be the best football team in BYU history. And the fact that they ran into such a good Kansas State team, the comeback win, maybe some shenanigans going on in the replay booth. I have heard from a couple of KSU fans lately this week where if instant replay had existed the way it did today, there was
heard that.
maybe a touchdown or two that probably wouldn't have gotten called back. I'm not here to legislate the past too much. We won't either. We'll talk mostly about the present. Because I think the present between these two programs is also really good, and there's a reason why it's getting that late, the 10:30 Eastern time, I guess, the 8:30 p.m. Mountain Time kickoff spotlight on ESPN. Both of these two teams, Derek, they're both 3-0. A little bit different 3-0 starts for both of them. K-State's got a win over a Big 12 team in Arizona, even though it won't actually count in the standings. But I feel like that game kind of solidified for a lot of people that this KSU squad is for real. I know they came in with pretty lofty preseason expectations, picked second in the conference. They're just behind Utah as the preseason Big 12 favorite. But I think Avery Johnson opened a lot of eyes against Arizona. The offense opened a lot of eyes against Arizona. And all of a sudden, this Wildcats squad looks like it should be one of, if not the top team in the conference, kind of right out of the gate, even though, the first couple weeks here at Big 12 play will probably go a long way towards determining their overall fate, right?
Yeah, it's funny because, and it might be maybe misguided, but obviously with the expectations being what they are, me kind of knowing intimately some of these players and how good that they can be in terms of just their overall upside and potential, the speed, what we're accustomed to seeing from Kansas State from a talent standpoint. I've covered the team since 2017. I've seen far worse talented teams on the Kansas State rosters go about 8-4. So it tells you what I think about this team, because exiting that Arizona game, it was like, okay, for me, how I viewed it was Avery Johnson took another sizable step in the right direction. And I see all these, like, this national praise, like how good he was. He threw for 2 touchdowns. He ran for over 100. He had 160 passing yards. And my takeaway was just that he took another step in the right direction because of what I know that what he can be. Because I followed him and covered him since he was basically a freshman or an 8th grader, freshman in high school or an 8th grader. And like, we're just scratching the surface of what this kid can be. So if people were impressed by what he did against Arizona, there's a lot more to unlock there. So I think that, if you're really impressed by that, give it a few games, maybe give it a year. We'll see how fast that will track. And this kid will really light your eyes on fire because of what he can do. Like I said, I've seen far worse talented teams at K-State, and just in my time covering the team, go 8-4. So that tells you what kind of talent that I actually see from this team. If I'm going to compare the two, what I will say is this, just generally my thoughts kind of going into this is that because of the atmosphere, because of the spot, because of the opportunity in front of BYU, because of where Kansas State is at on their schedule too, coming off a huge win over Arizona. They have Oklahoma State next week. BYU knowing what's in front of them, because if they were to pull off this upset and knowing what they have after Kansas State, they could go on a crazy good start to the season, because you're not talking about just 4-0. You're talking about a great opportunity for 5-0, 6-0 when looking at the schedule. So I expect BYU to potentially play its best game of the season this weekend, just with the spot on the schedule, the stakes of the game, where it's played, the night game, the whiteout, and all of that. On the flip side, I will say this: Kansas State will enter this game far more tested than BYU, I think, from a opponent standpoint. Not now, I do wonder how good Arizona is after watching that game. I have some questions about how good they might be, but it's still a lot better than any team that BYU has played. And I even think Tulane might be a lot better than some of the teams. Like Tulane, SMU, like on a neutral site, Tulane might even be favored in that one.
Yeah, I know there was a lot of consternation with some K-State fans about the way this team struggled against Tulane, but the Green Wave are looking like one of the better teams in the American, and probably, at least possibly, I'll say possibly, chasing that Group of 5 playoff berth right now with what they've been able to do.
What hurts them is having the 2 L's already in the loss column, even though they competed right there with both K-State and Oklahoma.
Yeah, no, for sure. But when you get those close losses and then you're comparing them to the rest of the Group of 5, I think they're going to be right there kind of in the mix and in that conversation. And obviously, stuff has to happen, a lot has to play out and that sort of thing. But they're right there, 100%. I did kind of get a little bit of the same feeling as you watching that K-State Arizona game of, is Arizona really the top 25 team that they were being built to be?
Probably not.
K-State kind of made them look a little bit silly in some ways. But again, that goes back to we've only got a 3-week sample size on this entire season. So is that K-State or is that Arizona? The reality is it's probably a little bit of both, but nobody ever wants to talk any nuance or any subtlety in that. So we won't as well. We're just going to go straight up hot takes, which is fine. We can go plenty of hot takes. I wanted to circle back around to, well, actually, you brought this up. I was going to bring this up a little bit later, but since you brought it up, let's go right there, because I do feel like for Kansas State, this game has a little bit of trap game potential.
It is not even the biggest trap game on the schedule, though.
No, sure, they've got a couple of these, but
West Virginia later.
Yeah, sandwich right in between the top 25 matchup with Arizona. Again, that conference and non-conference matchup that kind of got a lot of hype. It was a standalone game Friday night on Fox, all that stuff. And then they host Oklahoma State next week in a game that will probably play big time, will be a big time predictor of their title hopes or title contention. K-State doesn't get Utah on this year's schedule. So am I wrong to say that's the biggest conference game, at least of the year? Like, I think it really might be. And
Oklahoma State, K-State.
Yeah, I mean, outside of obviously like the Sunflower Showdown with Kansas, and I know Armageddon with Iowa State has its own.
And Kansas looks really rough right now. So for Kansas State, their biggest conference game does look to be like Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State's not even playing that well either. And that will probably be answered this week when Oklahoma State and Utah play, right?
Sure. That's true. That's a really good point. So sort of in that regard, I mean, maybe there is potential for some letdown or some look ahead coming to altitude, to Provo, first time being here since the 70s at BYU. I got to imagine, though, that this team is aware that this has the feelings of a trap game, right? Or at the very least, maybe head coach Chris Kleiman and his staff.
And they've been asked plenty of times already this week how they're handling that success from the win over Arizona. I will say the Oklahoma State game hasn't really popped up, so I think they're having pretty good tunnel vision right now. So as long as they can come back down off the high from an Arizona win, then I feel good about it. Maybe a good thing is that it was played on Friday instead of Saturday, so there is more time to come down, and being at home as well. So we'll see. I tend to think that the focus will be there what it comes down to is how clean they can play in a tough environment when BYU will probably be at their best.
Yeah. BYU, like I mentioned, they're off to a 3-0 start as well. They haven't been that impressive during this 3-0 start, or at the very least on offense. Jake Retzlaff's been a little bit hit and miss. He's had some really nice moments. He's also had some pretty poor moments, quite frankly. Their offensive line has been good. Their running back situation is beat up. They may be down on the depth chart for Saturday's kickoff with some injuries and some nicks to LJ Martin and Hinkley Rapati, who both missed the trip to Wyoming as well. So a little bit of TBD in there. But this BYU defense has been really good. One of the top 50 defenses in the country statistically. Again, I know who they played. It's FCS Southern Illinois, at SMU, at Wyoming. Not exactly world beaters, but the defense has been really good, I think, overall. I think it's fair to say that they'll be facing their toughest test this year with Avery Johnson and this K-State offense, which has, I feel like Johnson has kind of found a little bit of a match in heaven. You touched on him a little bit about how he's just scratching the surface, but it seems like this kind of shotgun wedding in some ways with co-offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach Matt Wells, who BYU fans know very well from his time at Utah State, has been a really nice pairing between the two.
And he's more a quarterback coach. I think ultimately the primary play caller is offensive line coach Connor Riley, who is the offensive coordinator that replaced Colin Klein after he left for Texas A&M following last season. So we'll find out how good BYU's defense is. Their numbers are really, really good this year. So I'm not going to take that away from them. Opponent be damned, right? So, but you do look back at last year and you see those numbers. They're pretty brutal. One thing that BYU has struggled with this year from a defensive standpoint, really their only flaw is stopping the quarterback run. And when you're playing Avery Johnson, that's kind of problematic because that's probably what he does best, at least at this point of his career. He really didn't utilize it until it got to the Arizona game. He kept those things basically hidden, or at least in the garage still, against UT Martin and Tulane, and then really busted it out and ran for over 100 yards on Arizona, who also, so far this season has really struggled with the quarterback run game. So similar things there. BYU, statistically at least, has a better defense than Arizona up to this point, but their numbers stopping the quarterback run game have been pretty similar, which isn't great. Kansas State's defense, I think it's a really good defense, but they played really bad against Tulane. And if you're wearing purple and you got those shaded glasses on, you're hoping that's just a fluke and not a dud. But they really bounced back and held Arizona in check. Tedero McMillan clearly got his, but they kept everybody else in check. What I thought was interesting, BYU has a pretty good offensive line. They lost Kingsley from last year's team, but still a pretty good unit. I think we all know Arizona has a really good offensive line as well. Jonas Savanea might be a first-round pick at offensive tackle. And Kansas State's defensive line just took it to Arizona's offensive line. So that's going to be an interesting matchup because BYU's offensive line has been pretty good so far, even with they only lost one or two guys from last year. But Kansas State's defensive front has really made it difficult on offensive lines already this year. Pretty young in spots outside of Brendan Mott. But that's been a good unit so far, which was maybe a question mark going into the season. It's going to be interesting. You also mentioned Retzlaff has his moments. You're right. But, man, I look back, and in his 7 starts going back to the end of last season, he's thrown 6 interceptions in those 7 games, I want to say.
7 interceptions and 3 fumbles, I think.
And 9 fumbles, but only lost 4.
Yeah, lost 4.
Yeah, lost 4. It's easier to take care of it at home. I will say that. But this is a Kansas State team the last couple of games. It's been pretty opportunistic on the defensive side.
Yeah, Jake Retzlaff is developing a reputation as a gunslinger, kind of that Brett Favre type of mentality where he's not afraid to chuck it.
Kind of like his head coach, right? Who is not averse to risks.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like the coach. Exactly. Maybe that's why him and Kalani Sitake kind of get along in a lot of ways, because you do want to have a little bit of that gunslinger mentality, I think, in your quarterback. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. It's just a bad thing when it starts to stray over the line to getting a little bit reckless, and especially against a defense that is opportunistic like what K-State offers. It could be it could be dangerous. But I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into something that you mentioned there about the defense, because you said there were some question marks on this K-State D, particularly up front, it sounded like, on the D-line.
On the
and in the front
edge.
seven as well, on the edge.
Yeah,
Okay.
very, very young, but they've played well this year, actually.
What have they been doing to kind of maybe make amends for where people thought they were through the offseason?
I think they were just unproven. A lot of youth and inexperience. They're playing like 5 or 6 defensive ends right now, and 4 of them. One is a transfer from an FCS school, and 3 are redshirt sophomores or redshirt freshmen. Sorry, redshirt freshmen. So you have 3 redshirt freshmen, an FCS transfer, a senior that hasn't played a bunch until this year, and another senior that's on his 3rd year of starting, and Brendan Mott, who's playing at a really high level. So they were just unproven, but they're producing right now. They made life very, very miserable for the offensive line. Linebacker quality and was a little bit of an interesting thing. They thought they might have the depth, but I was like, Austin Moore was a little bit of an underachiever last year. Now you have Austin Romaine as a first-year starter, and as a true freshman, look, playing middle linebacker as a true freshman has to be a nightmare scenario. You're 18 years old and playing in the middle linebacker in the K-State defense, but he left a lot to be desired. And this year he might be the best linebacker on the team as a true sophomore. So the questions are getting answered at a very high level. The interesting thing is like what we thought we knew was, hey, this could be the best secondary in the Big 12. And then they laid a complete dud against Tulane. But they bounced back. McMillan got his, but they tackled well, kept them in check, at least after the catch. So the secondary we thought was going to be the best position group. It probably hasn't up to this point, but especially because how bad they were against Tulane, but they were really good against Arizona.
Tyrone McMillan, by the way, probably going to be the best wide receiver that this Kansas State team faces all year. He's really good.
Chase Roberts is pretty good, though. He's not Tyrone McMillan, but Chase Roberts can play, right?
Chase Roberts is a nice player. He could have some NFL potential in his future. I've been saying this for a couple of weeks now. I think he could. Tyrone McMillan does have an NFL future and a high-end draft pick at that as well. So
Kansas State's priority played 2 like Sunday receivers next year, because not only did they go up against Tyrone McMillan, they played Mario Williams of Tulane, who could really go. He had 700 yards for USC last year.
So again, another example of this K-State defense just being battle-tested, and maybe in some ways being more battle-tested than this BYU team. I think there's a reason why they're a touchdown favorite, even on the road. Again, I see all of the elements of a potential trap game for K-State, but I also see all the reasons why they are favored, at least according to Vegas, and I can't fault anybody for wanting to take the Wildcats in that as well.
It's Avery Johnson's only 2nd true road start. He played a lot in Lubbock last year when he had 5 rushing touchdowns at Texas Tech, but he didn't start that game, and obviously he put that game away in the Red Raider crowd. I mean, Lubbock can really get on fire. That could be a really good environment, but he really took them out right away when he went into that game and replaced Will Howard, and then ended up running for 5 rushing touchdowns in Lubbock in basically 1 half, which kind of tells you what he's capable of as well. But his only true road start was Tulane. Because you have to remember, this is only his 4th start in general.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And he's still getting his feet wet. He still has maybe a demonstrable ceiling to really untap. But I think people are starting to see a little bit by when Will Howard left this Kansas State program, a very good Will Howard, fans and even some people around the program were like, okay, that's fine. Avery Johnson's right here in the wings. No big deal.
That's probably the only choice Will Howard had. I think the coaching staff chose Avery Johnson. So Will Howard had to find a new home. I think it was more that than anything. And it
was a very good quarterback, by the way. Will Howard was a very good quarterback.
Mm-hmm. And then what I will say, we haven't talked about it yet either, is Kansas State might have the best backfield in the Big 12 with Dylan Edwards and DJ Giddens.
Yeah, we haven't even touched on Dylan Edwards as well. So if you do finally figure out a way to contain AJ, to contain Avery Johnson, you still got Dylan Edwards that you got to worry about.
Yeah, Dylan Edwards, three games so far this year is 4 touchdowns and basically like 17 touches. And then DJ Giddens has ran for almost 400 yards already this year and had 1,500 last year.
That seems good. That seems all right. I'm no K-State insider, but that feels like a pretty good line.
Yeah, no, they have a nice backfield, and nothing against. I mean, UCF has a good one too with Penny Boone and RJ Harvey. So
RJ Harvey, yeah, very good. But a lot of good running backs, and that's not even talking about the guy who was a preseason Doak Walker contender, Ollie
who's
Gordon,
struggling right now.
who hasn't. Yeah, he hasn't been great. Alan Bowman's been able to pick up the slack fortunately for Oklahoma State, but yeah, a lot of really good running backs. I think in this league, it's a bad time for BYU to be as snake bit as they are.
Devin Neal, and Daniel Highshaw at KU.
Yep. Last question, Derek, and I wanted to get you out of here on this little note about the coaching staff, because Chris Kleiman, I think, is one of the more, he's getting more and more appreciated in college football. So maybe he's not underappreciated anymore, but he kind of came to K-State from building up or keeping the dynasty going, at least at North Dakota State. And he was just sort of like that's a nice hire. Like, I don't feel like it got necessarily all the attention or all of the praise that it deserved. But 6 seasons in now, 42 wins. He's only the second coach to ever win a bowl game with K-State, as you mentioned, which is a mind-boggling stat.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely mind-blowing to me. I wasn't sure if Chris Kleiman, the way he came in and kind of had some early success with K-State, would be able to stay in Manhattan. But here we are. It's been over 6 years, and it feels like the two have kind of found a little bit of a happy marriage. Is this a situation that you could see becoming, nothing's truly permanent in college football, right? But becoming about as close to permanent as you can get in this day and age?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a good way of putting it. You never say never because of all the factors that kind of go into something, and always needing to feel like you have the ability to win championships. So as long as they keep doing that, I don't think he leaves. What people have to remember, and I think even on a national scale, folks forget because they just assume, why wouldn't Chris Kleiman leave Kansas State? When he was at North Dakota State, who was the guy that hired him in Fargo? Gene Taylor, the athletic director of North Dakota State. Who's the athletic director of Kansas State right now? Gene Taylor. That's the guy he wants to work for, and I think that goes a long way. Now that he's kind of been there, he's comfortable. He probably isn't going to coach for a ton longer. This probably just feels like the last stop. He keeps getting a new contract seemingly every year, so he gets taken care of. It's, unless you aspire to be that coach at one of those 3 or 4 schools, and I don't know that he could get to that point. He probably had to make another stop in between. Then, what do they say? Don't screw around with happy, and I'm sure he's happy right now.
Yeah, and he's a guy. It does feel like K-State is one of those areas that kind of fits him geographically too. He's from Iowa. He's a UNI grad. Obviously, he spent a decade of his coaching career in Fargo, North Dakota. So I don't think he's enamored by like bright big city lights or anything.
Knowing him,
Little Apple,
that would repulse him probably.
Yeah, probably, right. And in some ways, maybe the Little Apple is perfect for him, right?
Yep, I think so. It's a good fit. He gets to work for the boss, like he loves his, doing work that I've been doing. I'm in my mid-30s. If you love your boss, that goes a long way.
It does. It really does. I didn't realize that Kleiman was as old as he is. He's 56 years old. I honestly thought he was a lot younger than that. You mentioned this could be his last stop that he's getting up there.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's really weird for a 45-year-old. Yeah,
ages well. He doesn't look 56. Yeah.
No, he does not at all. He looks like he's younger than me, and he's got me by I won't say quite how much because I won't expose myself, but over a decade, I'll say. Over a decade.
Yeah, it's I think he's already turned down opportunities along the way. Like,
yeah, his name's on every postseason watch list that you can imagine.
I think he has a good relationship with the new Washington AD. I think there was a chance there that he basically said, this isn't for me. Based on everything that I know, it sounded like Matt Rule initially told Nebraska no. And when he told Nebraska no, Trev Alberts went to Kleiman, and he also told them no. And then they circled back to Matt Rule and got it to work. But I think if the word out of his mouth was yes, I think there was about 3 or 4 jobs he could have had by now.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like I say, I feel like Chris Kleiman is on every single postseason coaching search watch list. He's a hot commodity on the carousel. Maybe that speaks to him signing a new contract every year or every other year, like you mentioned, to kind of keep that guy happy, keep him around. But he wants, I mean, he loves Manhattan. He seems to love K-State. He also looks good in purple, to be fair. He's got the right complexion, I'll say, to wear purple well. It's a tough thing to do. I went to a university where orange was our main color. Like there are some colors that just don't match well with a lot of us. He looks good in purple. He's doing very well in purple. And so I expect Chris Kleiman to be there for basically as long as he wants at K-State. And I don't see any reason why that shouldn't be the feeling right now from the athletic department, at least right now. Again, nothing's ever totally permanent. Nothing's actually permanent in college football. I thought that Jonathan Smith would be at Oregon State forever, or at least for a lot longer than he was, obviously alone in the program and everything. But with conference realignment and with how big coaching salaries are becoming, the consolidation of what I like to call the Power Two, forget Power Four anymore, the Power Two with the Big Ten and the SEC, nothing is truly permanent, I think. But I think K-State's hit on a really good one with Coach Kleiman, and I think it would take a lot, certainly, for him to make a move. And if you're K-State, you just ride out the success that he's bringing to Manhattan as much as possible, right?
Yeah, they couldn't be happier here, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, their next step is Saturday night, 8:30 p.m. at LaVell Edwards Stadium in Provo, Utah. That's number 13 Kansas State against BYU. I'll be in attendance. I'll have you there. Derek, you'll be there, I understand. You're coming into Provo, going to visit our beautiful state of Utah?
Yeah, it'll be the first time. Yep.
First time to Utah. Have you been offered a cougar tail yet?
I've discussed a cougar tail. I haven't literally been offered one, but it's been discussed, and apparently it's something you got to have, and they're having special cougar tails that night, I guess.
Yeah, so there are chocolate cougar tails that they will be bringing out. Normally it's just a giant,
I think I saw it was vanilla.
Bar. What?
I think I saw it was going to be vanilla.
Oh, is it vanilla this week? Yeah, I can't even keep track of them all the time. Normally it's a 16-inch maple bar, which is enough, but they would like to roll out their special ones and whatnot. If you want to experience your first cougar tail experience, first one's on me. So I'll that's how I'll pay you for this podcast, right? So we'll enjoy some cougar tails, and while you enjoy your first trip to Utah, welcome to our beloved state. If you need anything, you know people to reach out to. Obviously, I'll get you anything that you can. But if you guys see Derek Young he might be wearing purple, or he'll probably just be wearing a press credential. Be nice to him. He's good people, as you guys can tell. BYU fans have actually been pretty good with a lot of opposing Big 12 fan bases. I expect that to change next year when Utah comes in as a conference game. But until then, I think they've been all right with most of the opposing fan bases.
It's been good. And I think Kansas State has a pretty strong reputation fan-wise. I know Arizona fans were pretty impressed by the welcoming committee that they got.
Yeah, for sure. So you can read Derek online. KStateOnline.com is the website. That's part of the On3 network. If you've got a subscription, go sign up. You can see all of his work there, as well as anybody else over at On3.com. Does as good of a job covering Kansas State athletics, I think, as anybody I know. Also, check him out on X, I guess we have to call it, formerly Twitter. It will always be Twitter to me, Derek. I'm sorry. But at Derek Young KSO, that's at Derek Young, DEREK, Derek KSO on Twitter as well. And as always, check out the 3 Mile podcast. Derek Young and John Kurtz and Cole doing a great job there with weekly episodes around.
2 or 3 probably a week. Yeah.
Do you do a couple a week? Okay, I tune in about once a week, maybe twice a week. So I couldn't remember if it was more than that, but yeah. And I totally just lost my train of thought. Well, that's probably a sign that we should wrap it up.
Yeah, there you go.
Derek, thank you so much for joining me. Really do appreciate it. I hope you enjoy your first trip to Utah. Like I said, if any BYU fans see Derek or his posse from K-State, be nice to them. They're good people. Let's leave a good first impression on K-State's first trip to the mountains since the 70s. Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a really long time. I'm really excited to rekindle a series. This is one of the series that I was most excited for when BYU first joined the Big 12 was K-State. I know it maybe doesn't have the sexy brand name of like a UT or an OU, but I was really excited for Kansas State, and I think these two fan bases are going to be really good for each other in a lot of ways. For Derek Young from KStateOnline.com, I'm Sean Walker from KSL.com. See you next time.
Kids' wishes like that boy Cosmo. They steady hating on us, but we who they watch though. The Pac-12 mad, but we still on top, bro. Jaren Harder, Cody X, that's a cool connect. Yeah, my team is kinda old, but it's cool we vets. I'm hitting too hard, ow, I hurt my neck. Hey, Leak, you good, bro? I'm about to hit up Brad.